Hello and welcome to another episode of KARE 11 on the Record. I'm political reporter Danny Spiewak. This week we're getting a national perspective on politics in America through a conversation with former Trump White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci. He is now the co-host of a podcast known as The Rest is Politics US and has a tour stop coming up in Minneapolis this fall. I'm pleased to be joined now by Anthony Scaramucci, co-host of the podcast The Rest is Politics US. Anthony, thanks for being here on KARE 11 in Minneapolis. We appreciate it.
Really appreciate being on. Thank you. Happy summer.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. We've been enjoying it so far, and we're looking ahead to the fall because you and your podcast partner, Katty Kay of BBC, are going to be in Minneapolis in October. So just tell us, when you were putting together the tour, the podcast tour of the United States, why choose Minnesota and Minneapolis?
You know, I've been all over the area. I've been down to Rochester. I've visited some of the beautiful lakes that you have up there. And I'm just excited to be back. I'm also, I'm a big shopper, so I'm also a Mall of America fan. Is that embarrassing to admit here on the show? But
honestly, a lot of people just shop at the airport. So, our airport's so good. You can do that, hit MOA, you're good.
The airport's great. I've been up to Wayzata. There's a beautiful hotel in Wayzata that I've stayed in. And obviously the waterfront there is as breathtaking as anything. When I bring up Wayzata, a lot of Minnesotans say to me, hey, don't mention these areas to your fellow Northeasterners. Okay, we don't want them trafficking. Part of my family's from Michigan, so I go to Traverse City a lot. They're like, don't mention Wayzata or Traverse City to your East Coast friends. Okay, we like the pristine nature of these places.
Right, keep the secret.
Right, exactly.
When you come to Minnesota, it'll obviously be, just weeks before the midterms. What do you think are going to be the defining issues when you're looking at November, whether it's in a state like Minnesota or any other state in the U.S.?
Well, listen, we have a contentious situation going on, and the midterms, I think, are going to be heated. I think one of the more interesting things that we have to consider as a nation, that due to gerrymandering, we only have of the 435 congressional districts, we only have about 20 of them that are actually going to be contestable. So I think one of the big conversations is, are we in a real democracy where the politicians are picking the voters? I thought the voters were supposed to pick the politicians, but I would imagine by the time we get to October, there'll be lots of data on the war, there'll be lots of data on the economy and interest rates. And I think it'll give the opportunity for American citizens that want to vote, hopefully as many of them will turn out to vote, a voice in the matter of what's going on in the country. And so it's closer than people think. A lot of people look at the poly market and say, okay, the Democrats are easily going to win, but there's really 183 or 184 congressional districts right now that are leaning Republican. And that's a result, some of it, by and large, related to gerrymandering. So we'll see what happens, but I think there'll be a lot to discuss in the fall, and I'm excited to be there. And these live shows are all about interaction with the audience and taking questions from the audience and trying to make it as interactive and, content-driven, but also humorous.
What do you make some of the Democratic primaries so far this summer? The Democratic Socialist wing, so-called progressive wing, has done very well in certain areas. Mm-hmm. What do you think that's going to mean in general election time in November if you have a lot of these sort of DSA, maybe left-leaning candidates in a general election?
Well, again, is it a signal? Is it just noise, or is it a signal? If it's noise, meaning it works in a place like New York or New York City, but it may not work in other parts of the country, we'll have to see what happens. But I would just say, I'm not a Democrat, but I would just say if the Democrats decide that democratic socialism is what they should be running on and that they're just not far enough to the left for the American people, I think that that's a mistake. I think by and large, one of the reasons why President Trump has been successful is I think he understands the culture war better than anybody. And while there are some people that want to be in the woke side of the culture, and I get that, the majority of the people have actually voted that they don't want to be that, and I'll provide some evidence. AOC herself, who's in that wing of the party, she had a lot of her constituents vote for Donald Trump in November of 2024. They voted for her. They split the ticket. She went back to them and said, why? They said, it's because of the culture. And so she took her pronoun designation off her Twitter or X account to reflect that. So I think Democrats have to be very careful with democratic socialism. I get that Mondani's a very talented politician. He's a successful communicator and messenger. But if you really look at the policies, I don't think these are policies that the Americans want to embrace. And these are policies that have frankly failed in places like San Francisco. You know, they've already moved on from those policies in San Francisco into something that's a little bit more moderate and a little bit more centrist.
When you look at just the economy and the state of economics in the country right now, to what extent do you think that will impact, whether it's the high gas prices or what's going on with the war, to what extent do you think that's going to impact some of the major races across the country?
I think it's going to be mission critical. I think the president knows, and I think his team, the Republicans know, they got to get prices down, and they've got to have some type of positive economic message. You know, the top part of the economy is doing well, stock market is doing well, but you know, not a very high percentage of Americans actually own stocks, and so they're concerned about the price of eggs, the price of gasoline at the pump, and those things are upside down. And so disposable income for the lower 2/3 of the Americans is actually down. Purchasing power has been weakened by inflation, and so it's not great data since the start of the president's second term. So, you know, can he turn it around? Obviously, if there was a real ceasefire in the war, you saw the oil prices drop. They've now spiked up now that we're still shooting rockets at each other in the Middle East. But my guess is it's going to be about the economy. You know, James Carville is mad at himself for saying it's the economy, stupid, because he's saying that could have been one of the reasons why people voted for Trump in 24. They saw him as a good steward of the economy, but he hasn't been a good steward of the economy based on the data here and right now. So it could hurt them come the midterms.
When you look at President Trump and the conduct of the war in Iran, do you think he's adequately sold this to the American public? You obviously worked for him, so you have some insight into him. What is his end game here with Iran? I think a lot of Americans are questioning the purpose of what's going on.
Well, listen, the polling is 70+% negative on the war. I don't think he's sold it. No, I think if anything, he did it in a knee-jerk sort of a way. He did it against the advice of DIA and the CIA, did it against the advice of Rubio, which was well documented in the regime change book. So no, I don't think he's done a good job of selling the war. And I think what those guys said would happen actually happened. The Iranians, they executed this thing called the the Mosaic defense strategy. And so as they decapitated the leadership, they had successive layers of processes in place where people rose to power to keep the regime in place. And so it's a tricky situation, frankly. You've got a lot of people who thought, you know, President Bibi Netanyahu, et cetera, thought that the regime would capitulate and collapse, but in some ways they've made the regime a little bit more resilient. Now the flip side is their economy's hurting too. So, you know, this is where the tug of war is. They need to sell their oil. We need them to sell their oil because we got to get prices down. And so, you know, maybe the president's luck will hold. Maybe he'll get a ceasefire, even though they've been sparring with each other.
Looking ahead to the midterms again and talking about sort of that message of the economy, economic populism, the big story right now is what's going on with Graham Plattner in Maine. From your vantage point, you're obviously an expert in communications and messaging. Where did this thing go wrong for Democrats with Graham Plattner in Maine?
Well, I want to start with the central idea. You know, if you asked me the rhetorical question, who runs the Democratic Party, my answer would be Donald J. Trump runs the Democratic Party. So he's the white billiard ball. He's the cue ball on the billiard table. He smashes himself into them and they scatter everywhere. They go off and kill each other. They attack each other. The best thing that's happened to Donald Trump in his career are the Democrats. And so the manifestation of Plattner as a candidate, they were trying to form a doppelganger to MAGA. They wanted somebody that looked and felt like MAGA but was more of a left-leaning person. And they picked up all of his garbage bag of flaws and they propped him up anyway. And so that was against their values. It was very hypocritical. And of course, he couldn't sustain himself and he blew up. And he's embarrassed a lot of these people And I'll tell you something. There's hypocrisy on both sides because Susan Collins, no fan of Donald Trump, but if you notice, he won't attack her. He went after Cornyn. He went after Cassidy. He went after Crenshaw. Those are all people in red states. He knew he could replace them with other red state people. No problem. You got a purple situation going on in Maine. And so even though he doesn't like Susan Collins and she doesn't like him, notice that the president never says anything about her. So we're in a situation, frankly, where she'll win again. That's my prediction. I think that Tallarico will also likely lose in Texas just because of the machinery associated with the establishment and the incumbents. But I would tell the Republicans, look out. You're vulnerable now because of what the president's doing in terms of, he's moving their message further to the populist right, and the Democrats are moving their message further to the populist left. And I think there's a real good reason why 40+% of the registered voters are independents now. They don't like either of those messages.
It's hard to say what will happen in November, but if Democrats were to flip either the House or the Senate, what do you think President Trump, the end of his term, would look like if he were not to have the trifecta, the full control of federal government?
Well, lots of investigations, a lot of people being drawn into subpoenas, a lot of people not adhering to subpoenas because, Trump likes when they do that. It'll be a hassle for him, but I think he is going to be focused on making money. I mean, he's let you know he has a 927-page financial disclosure. God only knows what he made that's off the books of the financial disclosure. And I think the remaining years of the presidency after the midterms are going to be about how many monuments can he put up to himself, how much gold can he lay into the White House, and how much money is he going to make. I think that's ultimately what he's going to be focused on.
What do you think the Republican Party looks like after 2028?
That's the greatest question. Obviously, none of us know the answer, but I am going to make a prediction here. I think there's going to be an intellectual civil war in the party. I think that Trump's leaving, so let's just say his political life is expiring. There's been a personality cult around the president over the last 10 years, and I think it'll be very hard to sustain MAGA in its current form. Moreover, a lot of these podcasters have already broken from the president because of the disavowal of things like releasing the Epstein files or going back into these forever wars. And so I predict that there will be an intellectual civil war, and it's not clear that the MAGA person will win that war. You may return to something that looks more familiar to people like McCain or Romney-style Republicanism. People say that's long gone. I want to be the contrarian here and tell you that I think remnants of that still live in the party.
All right, Anthony Scaramucci, thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you in Minneapolis in October.
Happy summer. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much. Welcome back. Over the next month until the August 11th primary, we're going to be sitting down with candidates in the Congressional District 2 race. That's a hotly contested U.S. House seat south of the Twin Cities. It's currently held by Congresswoman Angie Craig. This week, we sat down with one of the Democratic candidates in the primary, State Senator Matt Klein. Well, Senator Klein, thank you for coming to KARE 11. We really appreciate your time.
Danny, it's such a privilege. Thanks so much.
So you're running in a competitive DFL primary for Congressional District 2, making the leap you're attempting to from the state legislature to Congress. Why jump into the race here?
Well, I tell you what, the thing that inspired me, you know that I'm a physician, worked most of my career at Hennepin County Medical Center. When I got into politics at the state level 10 years ago, it was because of the experiences of my patients. And what they're telling me now is that they can't afford their lives. They're fearful for our democracy. They're tired of all the chaos out of Washington, D.C., and they want responsible, good legislators to step in, people of character, to try to right the ship. That's what drove me to work in the state Senate, and I think I can bring that same mentality to the United States Congress, where I think it's desperately needed right now.
If you were elected through the primary and then the general election, what would be some of your top 2-3 priorities in terms of legislation and bills that you'd want to get passed?
Yeah, so again, I've spent 35 years practicing and taking care of patients, and the biggest crisis that people are facing right now is that they cannot afford their health care. This is going to get a lot worse as we face $1 trillion in medical assistance cuts from the One Big Beautiful Bill over the next year, and we're going to have a crisis. People are going to see that their rural hospitals are closing down. They can't go see their usual physician. They can't get the home services they need to stay out of a nursing home. And so I'm eager to step into that in my role as a physician. And I think there will be the opportunity to build partnerships with Republicans who are facing the same difficulties invest in medical assistance and rebuild our healthcare delivery system. That'll be my top priority.
Your two your opponents are supporters of Medicare for all and some type of universal health care. Where do you stand on that issue? What does the solution look like in your mind?
Philosophically, I do believe we need to get to the point in this country where we treat healthcare the same way we treat public education, meaning that if you live here, you get a public education, you get healthcare because it's good for you, and it's also good for society as a whole. And I think that's where we need to get to. I've always been an advocate at the state level of a public option as the next achievable step to move us towards that. That's a public health insurance product that is, affordable for you. Your premiums are affordable, and we know it's good coverage, good care. We have it in Minnesota in the form of Minnesota Care for low-income working people. Everybody should have that. And I think that's the next achievable step to get us closer to universal health care. I also think we should certainly allow Medicare to negotiate prices on all pharmaceuticals and bring those pharmaceuticals down. In the state, I passed a prescription drug affordability board through my Commerce Committee and then into law. And that allows the state of Minnesota to regulate drug prices if they're excessive, like an epinephrine pen or others. And we should do that same thing at the federal level and get some control over those drug prices for Minnesotans.
When you look at just dealing with the Trump administration, potentially if you're elected, how would you handle that? Who knows if Democrats will control the House or the Senate or both? But what would be your stance toward either working with the Trump administration or opposing them? Where would you stand on that with trying to work across the aisle?
Well, in the state Senate, I've built a reputation on working across the aisle, and I'm proud of that. That's how I work as a physician. That's how I've always worked as a legislator. I'm sent there to do a job. It comes with expectations, and I think the voters of CD2 certainly expect bipartisan work. I don't think, though, that many people in CD2 approve of the deep injustices that have occurred in this state over the last year through ICE, and also of the terrible grift happening at the federal level. Donald Trump minted a crypto meme coin in his own image and made $2 billion off of that. And the people who bought it, his supporters, lost $2 billion. That's the sort of thing that Americans can't stand for anymore. In the state Senate, I passed a bill that eliminated cryptocurrency kiosks from our state. They were ripping off seniors for their entire life savings. I'm ready to step into that fight. We need people of character, courage, and integrity to do it in this moment, and I'm ready for that work.
In the CD2 primary, you're not the endorsed DFL candidate. How will you overcome that? Obviously, one of your opponents is going to have the advantage of having the state party on their side, for the next several weeks.
Well, the exciting thing about CD2 is that it's a purple district, and I've represented a purple district. I'm a moderate legislator, and I think that's what Democratic voters in CD2 will reward down the long run. I will say the endorsing process, is very arduous. It involves being able to set aside 3 long weekends and sit in an auditorium and advocate, and that's great. That's a good participation in democracy, but it really excludes a lot of people that I think will support my campaign: working families, seniors, people with jobs, young people, and I'm eager to earn those votes, and I think I'll be successful in that.
When it comes to foreign policy, where do you stand on how the president's conducting the war in Iran? Obviously, if you were in Congress, you would have a voice in potentially trying to put a check on that.
Yeah, the war is illegal. It was never approved by Congress. We know in our Constitution that war needs to be declared by Congress. I don't think that we should ever allow Iran to become a nuclear power. And to whatever means we need to do to achieve that, I would be supportive. But clearly, this war has failed to achieve that objective. It has cost Americans $1 billion a week. That's money we should have been spending on health care, on Social Security, on housing costs, on grocery costs, on gas prices. And yet it's gone overseas into this war, which seems to have accomplished little or nothing. That's why we put Congress in charge of declaring war, so that we can make some decisions in a judicious fashion, in a thoughtful fashion, and get it right. We got it terribly wrong in this war. This is pretty personal to me. My son is in the military. He's an active duty sailor on the West Coast. And I take our responsibility to consider when we go to war pretty seriously.
Would you vote to impeach the president if that were to come to you, if Democrats did control Congress in 2026?
I would, yes. I would vote to impeach the president.
I want to ask you about something else, too. Obviously, during the campaign, this came up. There was some national attention around you for you obviously voted for the prediction market ban, but then were fined a small amount for using those in your own race. Can you just explain? It's the first time we've gotten a chance to talk to you. How did that happen where you decided to wade into that territory in your own race?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking me. It was a full year ago. A friend of mine said, "Hey, did you know there's a prediction markets site with a wager on your race?" I'd never, worked with prediction markets. I downloaded the app. It caught my interest, and out of curiosity, I bet $50 that I would win. It was a mistake. I actually didn't know at the time I did it that it was against their rules. About 6 months later, they let me know that I had broken their rules. I accepted that, paid a penalty, and apologized to the Senate and to the people of Minnesota. It was a dumb mistake. I shouldn't have done it, and I apologized. I did take ownership of it and apologize, and I think in politics today, that's the right thing to do.
Looking at the broader issue, obviously the federal government has come after the state for passing the prediction market ban. Do you believe the state has the authority to try to regulate it?
Yes, we did pass a prediction market ban in the state of Minnesota, and I hope that withstands the challenge of the courts. It's the right thing to do. We've been very thoughtful about wagering in the state of Minnesota. We've assigned those duties to our tribal entities who have done it very responsibly. We have guardrails around problem use and underage use. We have taxation that brings some revenues to the state. So all those things are good about how we handle wagering and gambling in the state of Minnesota. None of that applies or pertains to prediction markets, which are completely unregulated, and may I also say, which don't have safeguards and don't really benefit the people of Minnesota, and sometimes wager on sort of abominable phenomenon like people dying or people being assassinated and so forth. So.
My last question for you is, we've talked about economy, foreign policy. What do you think in the next month ahead of August 11th is going to define the primary in your race?
Well, I'll tell you what, we've been extremely successful in fundraising in my campaign, and that's all through individual donations and labor unions that support my campaign. We are going to start on Tuesday with a 6-figure ad buy, and that's entirely through individual donations through my campaign. And I think that's really going to make a big impact in this race. I think it's going to change the dynamics of the race. A lot of people in the CD2 don't know any of the 3 candidates. After next week, they're sure going to know me. And I think I have a good message to project for this campaign, and I think I'm going to win it.
All right, Senator Klein, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Danny.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of KARE 11 On the Record. You can find us every Sunday morning at 6:30 a.m. and streaming on KARE 11 Plus.